What is up, hockey fans? Welcome to the Wraparound, brought to you by the Hockey News and presented by Sticks.com. I am your host, Emma Lingan. I'm joined today by Willie Ramirez and Mikael Augello, and we are here to bring you all of the bite-sized storylines from around the NHL today. Before we do, going to remind you that we are brought to you by our good friends at Sticks.com. Why break the bank on sticks when you can get pro-level composite sticks without the pro price tag at Sticks.com? That's STIX.com. Head over there now and gear up. All right, Willie, Mikael, we've got an all-American crew here today, so happy 4th of July to all of our American viewers and listeners as well. Still not really getting a day off here. Got plenty to talk about with free agency and trades, and it's the most exciting time of the hockey year other than playoffs, I think. So want to start here with Mike. You and I ended the show yesterday as this news was breaking. We got to sort of talk about it in real time. Nikolaj Ehlers signing with the Carolina Hurricanes, 6 years, $8.5 million AAV. So we talked a little bit about the fit for him in Carolina, but now I want to kind of dive into a little bit how this impacts Winnipeg, what this means for the Jets. So Ehlers had 63 points in 69 games last season, and then he had 7 points in 8 playoff games. So does Winnipeg have the weapons to replace his production? I mean, obviously, this is a player that has been injured quite a bit, and so they've had to sort of make do without him before. But Mike, I'll ask you first. Do you think, looking at Winnipeg's roster and their depth chart, how do you think they go about replacing a guy like Ehlers?
Well, I mean, first, the unrestricted free agent pool is pretty vacant now after less than a week of free agency. I looked up the list of available unrestricted free agents, and the top, I'd say, name is Jack Roslovic, who was a former Winnipeg first-round pick. I don't think he's going back to Winnipeg. The next is Jeff Skinner. Now, Jeff Skinner went to Edmonton on a one-year deal, so maybe he would be open to going on another one-year deal. But I think there's probably other places that he would go. There's been some rumor of Toronto, but they're needing more help on the right side than on the left. I think that the possibility here is probably an internal promotion, whether it be Brad Lambert. I think Braden Yeager is not ready yet, or Colby Barlow is not ready yet. They have a couple players who played with the Manitoba Moose that might be ready to make the jump. And I think a lot of teams right now, in a situation where the free agent pool is vacant, if they can't pull off a trade, then I think they're going to be more apt to giving some internal promotions. And that's probably what Winnipeg will do.
Willie, what do you think about, how Winnipeg, what the fallout is for Winnipeg here? And then also, which other NHL teams are going to have to look at maybe next steps as they look to, maybe replace some scoring depth if they've missed out on Ehlers in free agency?
Well, I think first and foremost, if they don't promote within, one of the names that continue to come up during all the trading frenzy that didn't move was Rickard Rakell. And I have to wonder, coming off the season that he put together, I mean, 35 goals, 70 points, both career high marks. Going to Winnipeg is always going to, or you look at a team like Winnipeg, they're always going to be in the mix. They just can't seem to get over that hump with Connor Hellebuck's playoff, whatever you want to call it, mystique, right? I mean, here we have the Vezina Trophy winner, an annual Vezina candidate, and they just can't get it done with him in the net in the playoffs. But they're still an attractive team. And if they can get the scoring depth, if they can get a high-end guy who can add some punch, I still think that Rickard Rakell might be somebody that they look at and is still an attractive grab from Pittsburgh, because is Pittsburgh on the downside? We don't know what's going on. As far as Sid Crosby, he's always going to be Sid. And he's obviously going out legendary status, but I just don't know if Pittsburgh, is up there with Winnipeg as far as potential. And Rakell may find that as a place that he'd like to be. So I think there. I think there's so many spots that didn't. I mean, most notably, we're going to be talking about Mitch Marner, and I think Toronto has scoring depth, obviously with who they have. But when you lose a guy like Marner, it's not as if you say, well, we still have. It'd be like if the Golden Knights lost Jack Eichel, right? Yeah, there's still Mark Stone, there's still William Karlsson, but you got to go get somebody to replace that. So I think, most notably with Marner gone, you have to look at just because they got Nick Waugh. That's not an even swap. I mean, I've covered Nick Waugh. He's a great guy and everything, but you're talking about scoring. So I think Toronto comes to mind right off the bat in terms of what they're going to do to replace those points. A guy like Marner who's coming off a triple-digit point year.
Well, Nikita, that's tough to pronounce, Chibrikov, as a young 22-year-old Russian who came over, was a second-round pick from a few years ago, he scored a bunch of points, 47 points a couple years ago in the AHL. He might be somebody who is ready to take a jump, and he played 4 games for the Jets last year. They've got almost $20 million in cap space. So in terms of what Willie is talking about, in terms of Raquel or Brian Rust, they can fit the salary, no problem. And we know Dubas and Kevin Cheveldayoff have made trades before. They did the McGroarty for Braden Yeager deal. So that could be an avenue that pays dividends in terms of the Jets sometime before the season starts.
All right. Well, Willie, you mentioned the trade of Mitch Marner. That's a perfect segue because you were in Vegas, and I want to get your thoughts on this. Obviously, the biggest fish in, what would have been the free agent market ended up being a sign-and trade from the Toronto Maple Leafs, ends up in Vegas. He is... now I think the question is, where does he fit in the forward lines in Vegas? Because, I mean, adding a high-end player like that can really shake up a lineup. Just ask the Nashville Predators and Steven Stamkos, and I think that they'll be able to tell you about that. But, where does he fit, Marner? I mean, you've got Eichel, you've got Stone, you've got Hurdle, you've got Karlsson. I mean, I feel like putting Marner in the top line with Stone and Eichel, that's sort of the immediate sort of knee-jerk reaction. You want to create that superstar powered top line, but that would then force Stone to play offside because all 3 of those guys are right-hand shots. They're also all sort of pass first players, I think. So you need someone who's going to put the puck in the net, right? So I think what it comes down to, Willie, is who plays with Eichel? Is it going to be Marner on the top line, or is it going to be Stone, or is it going to be both?
Well, I think when you have a guy like Eichel in the middle and he makes so many things happen, right, on offense, he's grown into, right, this is the first year where he started receiving votes substantially for the Selke. He hasn't always been known as the defensive forward. He's had the skills, but it's generally been his offense, right? So he makes things happen. The way that he can move in and out of defenses, skate between 2-3 defenders, I think as your top center, you have to put Marner with him because he can turn Marner into, yes, Marner, I think he ranks 3rd in the NHL since he entered the league with assists. So I think you have to go put Marner up there because Eichel or him can make things happen. I actually don't think Stone goes to the top line with those two. I think, we've talked about Stone since he got here in being that defensive guy. He's always a Selke candidate and should be, when he's played a full schedule and he's been healthy. But the re-signing of Riley Smith was huge because him and William Karlsson have had that established relationship since the team was established. We all know the backstory of Riley Smith, going away after they win it a week after going to the winning the Stanley Cup. He goes to the Penguins, then the Rangers. Now he's back here, and it was a clear fit. Kelly McCrimmon, general manager, said, we had to lock up Riley. This is where he wants to be. This is where he's comfortable. 1-year deals, he's fine with it because he liked being here and he's home. But that immediately creates this defensive line, one of the best 200-foot lines I think that we see in the NHL with Smith and Karlsson because of the chemistry. If you throw Mark Stone with him, with those two, I think it makes such an incredible line with leadership and depth and familiarity. Who you would throw up there? Barbashev is coming off an incredible season, but so was Pavel Dorofeyev. Now, he established a relationship with Tomas Hertl, so I don't know if you want to break that up. So for my first thought is Barbashev, Eichel, and Marner, Smith, Carlson, and Stone, and then it leaves you with Hertl and Dorofeyev in your third line, possibly with Brandon Saad. You have Howden, Sissons, and Kolasar. So I do like the fact that Barbashev can score. I think he'll be on the receiving end of a lot of passes from the other two, but I think Eichel lifts Marner's scoring abilities and potential, I should say, not abilities, but his potential of being an even more prominent goal scorer, leaving Eichel to do most of the grunt work in terms of the passes. And that Stone and Carlson, we talk about every single year, no matter what I'm doing. If I'm writing, if I'm doing a pregame show, whatever it may be, we're talking about Stone and Carlson making things happen at the opposite end of the ice to get the Golden Knights in flow through the neutral zone and into the offensive zone. So I think when camp opens, that's one of the lines that Bruce Cassidy is going to look at, is putting Stone with Carlson and Smith, Barbashev up with Marner and Eichel.
All right. Well, we'll have to see how that plays out here in Vegas. A lot of moving parts there. But I think regardless, if you've got Hertl and Dorofeyev on your third line, that's a pretty good situation to be in. Let's head over to the East now. The Washington Capitals relatively quiet in free agency. They allowed some players like Mangiapane, Radish, Eller to all depart in free agency. They did just sign or re-sign Anthony Beauvillier to a 2-year, $5.5 million extension, sort of as some depth there in their forward group. So Mike, I'll ask you, do you think, obviously Washington was trying to do the sort of retool on the fly as long as they have Ovechkin still in their lineup, but do you think that the fact that they've, allowed these free agents to depart other than Beauvillier, and now they are not really doing much else, do you think that this is Caps are going to start to maybe inject some more of their rising prospects into the mix next season? And if so, how do you think this impacts their playoff chances, considering they've got Ovechkin for one final year here?
I don't think it's going to affect their playoff chances at all. I mean, if you're injecting, Hendrix Lapierre into a bigger role, or Ivan Marashenko, or any of their young players that played in Hershey, I think, not to say that the players that, Mangiapane was a good support player and Lars Eller was a good checking, middle six center, but I think they have the depth, and, Taylor Radish had 27 points last year. So, I think they can recover from the departures, and, I think that they'll be able to, their top six are really good. Somebody like Protas, who had a breakout year with 30 goals. Right now, I think he's going to continue to go onward and upward. They're probably going to get more out of Pierre-Luc Dubois, who only scored 20 goals last year. I think he really had a good recovery from a bad year with LA. They've got a good pipeline of young players. And, Spencer Carberry is one of the best coaches in terms of getting the most out of his players. So I think they'll be fine.
Willie, what do you think about the Capitals and what they've done or maybe haven't done so far this offseason? Do you think it's that they're in a good spot to, be back in the playoff race again this year?
Yeah, I think that we were also surprised at what they did last year, that it puts them in the spotlight during the offseason to see what they're going to do, since they didn't get through the playoffs, right? But I think, first and foremost, with their goaltending tandem, and the fact that there's really no controversy, especially with Logan Thompson and what he went through in Vegas, and there's a lot of backstory going back to the Stanley Cup years. So I think the fact that he's happy, and as Michael said, with Alex Ovechkin there, I don't think that there's a problem in the locker room. And I think that's first and foremost what I've learned over here with the first 8 years of the Golden Knights in terms of locker room and chemistry. And that's first and foremost is what you have to address. And it doesn't seem like the Capitals have an issue there in terms of, having to sort of get a better vibe or bring people in. And I think by, one thing also, Tomas Hertl, right, and veterans that they brought in during the trade deadline, like the year before, they're obviously have some years and some experience on Beaulieu, and he comes in mid-season and he does his job. He's effective, but he didn't necessarily have a big campaign overall for the Capitals and the Penguins. You have a full summer to bond and training camp and a full year with the team. And I think he can blend in fine. And I think that they're just sort of building within and trying to, I'm guessing, is sort of feed off of what they did last year and feed off of that going into next season. Because, again, I don't think anybody expected them to have the type of season they did. Some of it got distracted maybe by Ovechkin's race to Gretzky. And at times that became the focal point. But overall, I think that it's a good locker room. And I think that's what, like I said, going back to the Golden Knights and that first year that I've learned over the years is that chemistry it means a lot more than people actually think or fans know. So I think that they'll be fine. And I don't think that because we're not hearing much is nothing to be alarmed about.
All right. Well, let's take a break from the NHL. Let's hop over to the CHL for a moment here. Rick Westhead reported this week that there is a proposed ban on fighting. The Office of Sport Integrity Commissioner has urged Hockey Canada to push for a ban on fighting across all junior leagues. So now it's already been enforced in the Q, but now this would expand to both the WHL and the OHL. So essentially a ban is not a ban in the sense that we think of it. It's more of a stricter punishment. Obviously, fighting now would result in a game misconduct, for example, instead of a 5-minute major penalty. But looking at how, the office is citing things like a culture change and protection of their young players and not, being able to defend themselves at that age. Michael, do you think that, I understand the reasoning behind it, but then what happens if you're a young player who's not allowed to fight for your entire junior career, then you get to the NHL or the AHL, then does that almost put you at a disadvantage, or what do you kind of make of all of this?
It definitely puts you at a disadvantage. You see some players who are in the NCAA, and we know that, and I'm not completely 100% attuned to what the Q has done, but I believe it's if you fight, you get a game misconduct, and then as each fight goes along, you can get a 1-game suspension or a 2-game suspension. So they're not banning it in terms of you can't do it. It's just the penalties are greater. But by the penalties being greater, you're not prepping these players for the NHL. And if they're aiming to be in the NHL, then I think that and that's the goal of most players who play junior or play college hockey. And we know that not all of them do it, but they have to be prepared for that. And what I think they want to do is they want to prevent some 16-year-old kid from getting beaten up by some 20-year-old guy who's a goon. I get that. I understand that completely. But we know from being in the rink that fighting is popular and fighting is going nowhere. So you can ban it, but you're not going to take it out of the game. And they can put all these culture change rules and everything. Kids want to fight. Kids like fighting, and the fans like it. So you're not getting rid of it.
Willie, what do you think about all this? How do you kind of see this shaping out going forward?
Yeah, I agree 100% with what Michael said. First and foremost, I would imagine it's one of those secret things or one of those after practice things where, you think back to the old 80s movie, right? What was it? Youngblood, Mike, right? Where Rob Lowe is taught by his older brother and his dad how to fight so he could learn how to, stand up for himself in the junior leagues. That's what they're doing in youth hockey. I didn't play hockey, but I did, live in Minnesota for a few years and went to Minnetonka before they grew and became a powerhouse. And I remember that was something that they would teach, is how to fight properly to defend yourself. Now all of a sudden you get to somewhere where they're discouraging it, and I think that's the key. Is they're making it sound like we're discouraging, but doesn't mean that you don't have to. You're not encouraging it, but you're also it's part of the game. It's been part of the game, and by removing it or discouraging it, you could be teaching kids to sort of get bullied and not stand up for yourself in certain situations. I liken it to the WNBA in reality, because or baseball, right? We have now a physical WNBA where I think you're going to see a little bit more physical play in college to prepare these ladies, because as things get more physical, same thing with baseball. It's not encouraged what you're going to end up with if you try to instill this ban. You're going to end up with sort of a high pitch, and we're going to charge the mound. You're not going to get rid of it. At some point, there's going to be a fight. It's just now going to be a stiffer penalty. Fighting's discouraged in baseball, but hey, if you throw at someone's head, you're more than likely going to see someone charge the mound. So if something gets a little too physical, and to be honest with you, it may increase things, because now all of a sudden, hey, they can't fight, they can't afford a penalty, they can't afford a suspension. So we're going to get a little more physical and push the envelope just a little bit, knowing they can't fight. Well, now all of a sudden it's going to sort of maybe encourage regulation clock physicality, and it could increase injuries to a degree, because you're going to see kids, juniors, going after one another a little bit harder, thinking, well, they're not going to fight me back because it's a stiffer penalty. They don't want to get suspended. So it could actually turn into be a detriment.
All really good points here. I think will be interesting to see what happens there going forward. Want to talk about women's hockey really quick. It's a big week for girls hockey in North America, hitting some record numbers. Hockey Canada released their annual player registration data, showed steady growth in women's and girls hockey. This year, they set a new record in Canada with more than 115,000 participants. So that's up 2.4% from last year to this year. And then south of the border, USA Hockey also saw a lot of growth around female hockey in all ages, from 6U all the way to adult. So total registration had reached 98,000, a little over 98,000. So that's a 5% increase over the previous year. So seeing some steady growth there in both countries. Mike, I'll start with you. How much do you think this growth has to do with the visibility of the PWHL and how big of a success that's been in its early years?
I think it's helped, but I think more applicable to the growth has been the U.S.-Canada rivalry in the Olympics, and I mean, that's an ongoing rivalry. The two countries, when they play each other in the Olympics or the World Championships or whatever, it's a pitched battle. It's a war. I think that's helped. I think Title IX in the U.S. has helped, in terms of promoting women's hockey at the NCAA level. And before the PWHL, you had the two rival leagues, so there were more opportunities for women, and I think that gave them an avenue to actually make a bit of a living. The pay scale was not anywhere close to what the NHL was, but it could get there. I mean, I think that the PWHL is growing. We've seen expansion, and it's probably going to continue to expand, and I think that's going to help, but it's on a positive track. So, I mean, it's a great thing to see.
Willie, what do you think of this? Do you think it's PWHL's visibility? Do you think it's the Olympic rivalry? Both? Neither? What do you make of this kind of growth in women's hockey?
I think it's an appreciation for women, professional or amateur and professional women athletes on the whole. I tell people this all the time in my coverage of the WNBA and local athletes. I was on the sidelines for the very first flag football high school championship in Las Vegas. I think it was 2015, and it was just called the Clark County School District Flag Football Championship. Now there's a state championship. And anybody watched the Super Bowl, the halftime commercial, that girl that was in that commercial is from Las Vegas. She's one of my sports leadership classes, students from a class that I mentored, Kilolo Westerland, who's going to be the face of USA flag football. We've seen the growth with the WNBA in the past several years, realistically since Asia Wilson came into the league, not just Caitlin Clark. So now we are eventually going to see somebody emerge. I mean, there are popular names in PWHL and in women's hockey, but there's going to be someone that's emerged that catches on, and it's going to be the next Asia Wilson, Caitlin Clark, Brianna Stewart, Sabrina Ionescu, Kelsey Plum, Kilolo Westerland in flag football, Macy Johnsich. I could go on and on with these two sports, but the same exponential growth that we're seeing with these sports, it's going to carry over to hockey. It's just an automatic, not because of any gimmick or fad or trend or hype, more so because it's becoming more popular. Our population is growing, and girls want to play sports at a younger age, specific sports that they can, in Las Vegas, they just, in the state of Nevada, I should say, they just made wrestling, gave girls their own sanction. They were having to wrestle against boys. Eventually, we're going to see it in college. They're going to be getting scholarships. So, yes, I think it's more so just on the exposure that professional and amateur women's sports is getting on the whole, and that we have dynamic athletes out there. That's my take on it. I think if there's anybody that fits the model of who could be a great spokeswoman, not just her, but I had a chance to sit down with Sarah Nurse a couple of years ago when USA and Canada was doing a tour, and they played out here in Henderson, Nevada. I mean, and she's got the names, she's got the relatives, right, in terms of Kia in the WNBA, and of course Darnell. So there's one person right there. But there are so many that there just needs to be a marketing overhaul and make sure that they continue to grow the marketing brand and the social media brand and make sure it's ending up on people's algorithms and dynamic play and goalie saves. That's what's going to grab the attention. The athletes are already in place. I just think it's feeding off of the hype of women's sports, which is fantastic.
What the PWHL is praying for is an American rival to Marie-Philippe Poulin. They're looking for their Caitlin Clark. If they get that, they find somebody to rival her, then then the PWHL will explode.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic to see the growth and increased appreciation for women's sports all across the board. You talk about that Canadian-American rivalry. One area where we're definitely going to see that is in the 2026 Winter Olympics. So as of this week, the IIHF and the NHL officially reached the agreement where NHL players can participate in the 2026 Olympic Winter Games in Milano Cortina. So, Mike, I'll ask you now. I mean, this is going to be interesting. It's always kind of been this big brother complex with Canada and the US at the international level. But now, I mean, do you think USA is really gaining an edge here just with, we saw the Four Nations experience. The US just came off their first World Championship win since 1933. I mean, it seems like they're gaining some momentum here at the right time. Do you think it's going to be enough to make this, maybe a little bit more interesting between the US and Canada?
Only if the management of Team USA learn the lessons of the Four Nations and not make stupid picks like Brock Nelson and Chris Kreider and sit Kyle Connor in the championship game. They didn't pick Tage Thompson. They didn't pick Cole Caulfield. They left off a number of players. Now, and they had injuries to McAvoy and Kachuk. I mean, don't underestimate Canada. Canada's going to bring it. They're going to be great. If they get a goaltending performance from Jordan Binnington like they got in the Four Nations championship game, then it's going to be tough to beat them. But the U.S. had opportunities by roster selection and by decisions to beat them, and they didn't. But hopefully they learned their lesson this time around.
Willie, what do you think? What's this rivalry going to look like at the Olympics this year or next year?
Well, I think the rivalry is in place, and I don't think it's going to look any different than it's already been, and I think it's going to be intensified because of Four Nations. I think, of course, the fight that breaks out in the first period and what we saw immediately, we just talked about fights, right? Think about this. We were all on social media. We were all on Twitter. What we were talking about as this rivalry unfolds in Four Nations. We're talking about the fights and how great it was just to see that and how intensified it meant even more for Four Nations. So I think, that right there, it sort of defines fighting from our previous topic, but it defines this rivalry. The one thing that I do worry about, just for the storyline, we understand, the ban, but the IOC upholds the ban on Russian teams ahead of the Olympics, is how many times we're going to hear, well, what would have happened if, and the Russians couldn't get in. So if that, I just don't want to hear and see that. I know it's going to, but let's not let it distract from the beauty of the sport and what we've come to appreciate and make the Olympics become political. Unfortunately, it probably will, but that's the one thing I fear.
Yeah, but half the Russian team is going to be in an old folks home before they get to the Olympics next time.
I don't know. Hey, you saw what Ovechkin just did. I mean, and he's, in peak athletic form, I say with the utmost sarcasm, but it doesn't matter because he can still score goals at a record-setting pace.
Let me just interject real quick. The Russian contingent of Las Vegas, and I'm not going to say who, but there were reserved comments, and you could tell the emotions upon returning of Four Nations and during the play. It was bothersome. It bothered them that they weren't able to compete, represent their country, and just play in such a special event. Now, Four Nations in the mid-season, part of the All-Star break, could be one thing, but I would imagine they feel the same way for the Olympics. So there are some players that are very passionate about feeling as if they're banned, and the fact that, hey, we get to play in America in the NHL, but we can't play, or in North America in the NHL, but we can't play in the Olympics. So I'm assuming that that's just one of 32 teams. There are 31 others with Russians that feel the same way.
Very true. All right. Want to wrap up today's discussion with one final NHL free agency topic. Mikael Granlund was one of the top centers available on what was a relatively thin free agent market this year. Signed to a 3-year deal with the Anaheim Ducks worth $7 million AAV. Now, the Ducks certainly had the cap space to make that happen, but Mike, do you think this is an overpay, $7 million for a middle six center? I mean, I think that Granlund is solid at being just that, a middle six center, and he can be helpful when they, hopefully for them, make the playoffs. And, I think a lot of people think that this is a team that is really knocking on the door of something here. And, how do you think Granlund fits in at that price point, and what is he going to do to impact this roster under this new coaching staff under Joel Quenneville?
The prices that were paid on July 1st are obscene. When you look and consider the fact that Mikael Granlund is a very good player, no doubt. I agree with your assessment. He's a middle six center. He scored 20 goals twice in his career. And you're paying him $7 million AAV. Now, this is a move that Anaheim is making because I think they believe that they can make the playoffs. And he, as a veteran center behind, the Leo Carlsons and the Mason McTavishes of the world, that they think that they need that experience. But it's and they have the cap space to burn. So I think it's more a factor of that. He was the last really effective center in this free agent class, and they overpaid him. It was only on a 3-year deal, but it was a massive overpay.
Willie, what do you think about that signing and, covering a fellow Pacific Division team? What do you think of the Ducks and what kind of noise are they going to make this year?
Well, first and foremost, before I talk about Granlund real quick, I'm glad that John Gibson finally got his just due and got out of there, because I can't tell you how many times I've sat atop press row and watch the Ducks get here with Gibson, go, man, this guy deserves better, because who knows with this organization, right? And some of the efforts that he's put forth, because he's got to have a couple of good seasons left with a quality team. With Granlund, what I think is that the Ducks, they send Kreider to the Rangers and Zegras to the Flyers. And what I think in their minds in the front office is, regardless of what Granlund brings, hey, if we pay this guy this, we look as if we have a $21 million guy. We have a $7 million per year forward. I think it makes them feel better that they got somebody that, whether he's worth it or not, in the front office's eyes and in the public's eyes, hey, we got a big time forward. Because just because you pay a big price doesn't mean you got a big time guy. Mike's right. I mean, the stats got to back it up. Now this guy's got to go out and prove that it was worth it. I think it was more so from a mental aspect to make them feel better about getting rid of signing him. I'm looking at Mike's notes here, sending me a little message here. He's sour on Gibson going to a program, but I don't know, Mike. I think it might be a better move than where he's at.
No, I think John Gibson's a fine goalie. I just think the Detroit Red Wings are a disaster. So, but they traded Trevor Zegras, and now you bring in a more experienced center to play behind Carlson and behind McTavish. So I like the move. I just think it was about probably $2 million too much, but that's free agency for you.
Well, hey, Detroit and Buffalo are always those teams at the beginning of the season saying which one's going to get in the playoffs. So you're obviously on that Buffalo, you cover Buffalo, but at the same time, I just think that the Red Wings at some point, they better do something. That's all I know. So maybe Gibson can be a helpful asset.
All right. Well, that remains to be seen. On that note, however, that is going to do it for today's episode of the Wraparound. Thank you to all of our listeners and viewers who've tuned in to watch us talk some hockey during a very busy, I would say, first official week of the off season now. Thank you again to Stix.com for sponsoring us. We will be back next week. For Willie Ramirez and Mikael Augello, I'm Emma Lingan. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.